Well, welcome everybody. Glad to have everybody back. Hang on just a second. Noise variance there that I forgot to turn off. God darn it anyway. Anyway, welcome to Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. We're excited to have another edition here. This is our last edition before the Harris Clash. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And last week or 2 weeks ago, a customer was talking about some shot graphs. So we're going to talk about how to read a shot graph, and I've got some templates here to kind of show you about that. And that's pretty much what I've got. Had another busy Monday. It was I didn't think it was as busy, but when I seen the numbers, it ended up being good. So can't complain about that. Everything's been going good at BHE, and like I was just telling Chad before here, we finally got rear ends, which had been back ordered for a while. So we've got quick changes on hand now, and being able to finish the new car for Jake McBurney. And that's pretty much about the extent of what we got going on there. Just been busy. How about you, Chad? What's new and exciting at Wehrs Machine?
Oh, not too much. We're plugging away. We're talking about back orders. We're kind of catching up too. Summer slows down a little bit, gives us an opportunity to put some stuff on the shelf and get caught back up. So we're ready to go for next build season. But I guess the biggest problem we got is the machines. The Ultraforce machines, we're having troubles getting the touch screens for those. Our partnership with AccuForce, Keith is having troubles getting the touch screens for the automatic machines. So if you do have an automatic machine, I wouldn't sell it. It might be a year before we get them touch screens. So
Oh, wow.
I would stick with what you got. Otherwise, we have manuals. We should be sitting pretty decent on them. We bought a bunch of touch screens to make sure we're good there. So other than that, thrashing, getting the factory support trailer ready to go. We're going to debut it at the Clash next week. We're
Awesome.
excited to get our new trailer. It's going to have more room. So when we go to these big events, we've had to take a spare van or something like the Super Nationals or the big events where we don't have enough room to take everything. So this trailer is a little bit longer, a little taller, gives us a little more room. So we're trying to organize that. Austin's in back working on it now, and when I get done here, I get to go help him. So should be exciting. Get that done on the road. We're working on some 25th anniversary stuff. We'll have our new shirts. At Super Nationals, there is when we usually debut our new shirt. We got our new cups done today. So
Those look very nice.
Yeah, lasered in house. So we can I put a snap out about that, and we can laser cups. So anybody wants any cups, tumblers, lasered, we can do that too. So, and I got a new product too. I'm long-winded tonight here, huh?
Oh, hey, go ahead, man. She's your show.
I like debuting stuff on the show, and we don't wait anymore for trade shows, so we just debut it as soon as it's ready to go. These are our new WM470. These are our nose valance supports, so these run from your bumper bar down to your valance. They bolt through on the bottom. We made a nice little clevis there. This is a little beefier. We were using some 1/4-inch tube stuff, and that seemed to break right away. We used some 1/2-inch stuff. That was a little bulky, so we went with 5/16. This is the same clamp that works on the limit chains, so we can do it in any tube size: 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4. So, and the lengths are 4 inches to 10 inches. So, just another new product that we've been working on the last few months here. So we're excited. Those are on the website, so you can take a look at those.
So they're in stock, ready to ship?
In stock, ready to rock. Yep.
And what's the general cost?
$50 for the whole kit. So you get the clevis, the bolt to bolt it to the valance, the tube, heims, and the clamp. So everything you need there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, it looks like we've got a fair amount of questions already. Dan's question, you can kind of read it there. He's wanting to know if we ever tried a an inner tube cut down to a 2 to 3 inch wide piece to make kind of a sock to protect that Torrington bearing. He says a Harley 16-inch tube stretches nice over that cup. Nice to know, Dan. Thanks for that information.
He sent me a cool picture. It looked like it worked good.
Trace, what are the pluses and minuses on a zero index of an A mod? Also, what is the gain putting lead on the understeer bar on left rear?
Underslung.
Underslung.
Lead on the underslung.
Duh.
Lead on the underslung.
Well, in my opinion, I'm not a real big fan of mountain lead low on anything. I think it needs to be axle high or higher rather than lower. The lower, when it's really low like that, it just basically makes the car weigh low and it takes the roll center down a little bit, the center of gravity down a little bit, so it can kind of eliminate roll or minimize some roll if that's what you want to do. I'll let you go ahead and talk about the zero index.
Well, I mean, the zero index basically takes the bind out of the left rear suspension. You clock the 4-link rods so that when you get into full droop, you're nowhere near camming over, and lets you run more drive angle in the car, which is traction. And basically it puts compliance in. I would run it all the time. The pluses and minuses are, the plus is the compliance. The minus is it's not an automatic go to victory lane and kiss the trophy girl. It definitely unbalances the race car, and you need to work on it. It's gonna make more left rear traction, so it makes the car freer on entry. Some guys say that it throws it on the right front, so you got to put right front spring in it. But it's one of them deals that you need to commit and work with it, because I feel it's the best way to go myself.
I've had really good luck with it, and that's the thing. You just have to work a little bit with the balance of the car. And once you get that down pat, I think a balanced car with the zero indexing is a faster race car than a balanced car without the zero indexing. And both cars need a certain amount of balance to make them work to begin with. So you just have to do a little bit more adjusting, playing with the right front and some of that stuff like Chad just said. Mark, hey, Chad, running a metric IMCA car, stock car, what's better, all steel bushings or bushings with nylon inserts?
Well, the bushings that we make it's actually acetal. It's not nylon, so it's a little bit better material. And the reason that we choose to use an acetal is because it's a bearing material. Anytime you do steel on steel, if you have a good maintenance program, I ain't too worried about it. But anytime you lack grease and you have steel on steel, you're going to have issues where if you grease the acetal bushings, or Delrin as it's called, once, and you get a little bit more forgiveness there because the plastic is a general lubricator anyway as a wear bushing. So the steel on steel, I mean, like I said, it's okay if you make sure that you grease them all the time and you keep pushing the dirt out of there.
Yeah, it does make, I mean, it's a maintenance item to begin with. It's a little more maintenance with the steel bushings. We run that stuff, whatever you call those bushings, we run that plastic stuff in all of our stock car lowers and our Chevelle lowers for the modifieds. I've got an 11 Hoffman, works good, but left front is pulling off the ground too much. Left rear is chained up, preloaded, 100 right rear, 225 is, and the right rear is a 225, the left rear is a 100. How can I get the left front down more? More than likely, rear end side to side location is critical. I would be willing to bet that your right rear or your rear end is too far to the left I'd highly recommend moving that, like a quarter inch at a time, moving it to the right. It's going to take a little bit of side bite out of it, but if you're lifting the left front, you've got too much side bite to begin with. And so moving that rear end location is crucial, or using wheel spacers. You can put a wheel spacer on the right rear, and I use a quarter and a half inch a lot of times in that situation where the car's just hooked on the right rear too hard, and that's your case there, Sean. When you're lifting the left front, the car's hooked on the right rear too hard. Dustin wants to know, can you guys explain more on anti-dive, how it works, and what you do to change it? What your guys' opinion on it? Well, it's kind of a chassis manufacturer's deal. It's another one of those deals that's kind of a whole package type of a deal. Um, we run we don't run a lot of anti-dive in the right front. I'm not a big fan of running a lot in the right front. I do put a little bit more anti-dive in the left front because, of course, I like to see the car when you go down into the corner and you get on the brakes. I like to hold the left front up a little bit more, kind of keep the car with a little bit of side bite. It's loading the right rear, keep it kind of like putting a heavier left front spring in there. I feel that works pretty decent. Anti-dive basically is it's where you take and draw a magical line between your two upper A-frame mounting points, and then how it intersects when you draw a magical line between your two lower A-frame mounting points. And of course, the further that point is away, the less it's going to affect the car when you're getting on the brakes. And most generally, anti-dive really only helps you when you're on the brakes or when you get on the brake pedal. So that's kind of my opinion. What do you have to add, Chad?
That's pretty much spot on.
Buddy Ray Jones. So many folks have had questions about setups or changes about their program, but I've never heard maybe change your driving line. That's a good point. I mean, I actually had that conversation with a sport mod driver last Saturday night at Boone, because her comment was that the car was pushy. Well, when she drove the car in there and got the car over on the right rear and hustled the car had the front end wasn't tight whatsoever. But when she drove it in kind of straight, go-kart style, the car didn't get on the right front enough with the way the car was set up to actually load the front end and keep the front end stuck. And so it was kind of the same thing that, and I explained it to her in that situation, that you've got to get to the point where if it's doing something you don't like, change your driving style or change your line, back your corner up or charge your corner in a little further, do something different rather than sit there for 5 laps with the car pushing on you and getting frustrated because the car won't turn. Like Boone Speedway is a wide racetrack. There's plenty of racetrack there to work with, and so that was that's a great question. I'm glad you mentioned that, buddy. That's something that's huge. If the car's not doing something that you want to, change your line a little bit, back the corner up a little bit, charge the corner a little bit more, or something to that effect. Because when they drop the green flag, you got what you got. So the only option you really have is your brake adjuster and your driving style. So that's pretty much the only adjustments you're going to have until you bring the car back in and make adjustments. A very good point. I appreciate that. James, a mod Wasota zero index lift bar. what is the use and advantage of the W200-24 and when to use it?
So that's clamping up the left rear shock, the front shock. So that's going to make the car turn in and give it traction off. It takes the cage rotation out of the shock on acceleration and decel. So that just makes the car rotate and gives it traction. So like a tight corner track is probably where I would recommend using that. Don't you think?
Yeah, I would agree.
Clamping the left rear.
Yep, I completely would agree. I'm not sure, buddy, what you're meaning. Are they IMCA legal? We can use a brake adjuster. You can't use any chassis adjusters or anything like that, but you can use a brake adjuster. And that's about the only adjustment that you have as a driver in the cockpit of the car. On an IMCA modified crate car, what upper left bar is best for slick racetracks? Well, kind of depends on if you're running the zero indexing stuff, and if you're not. If you're not running the zero indexing stuff, I wouldn't go past about 26 degrees in static, which is going to get you in that 45-degree range in dynamic. And that's kind of where you got to measure that in dynamic, and then adjust your chain accordingly, depending on where you want it to be. But you're starting, in dynamic mode or in static mode around 24, 25, 26 degrees in that neighborhood. But if you're on a zero indexing car, you can run a little bit more angle in that because you don't have the chance of that thing indexing over and tearing up a bunch of stuff. So, on our zero indexing stuff, our static is usually about 28 degrees and our dynamics usually 48 to 50. So it just depends. We start with 48 and then we adjust the chain accordingly if we want more degree on there. More degree in certain situations is traction. Sometimes on a slick racetrack, adding more degree sometimes can be a detriment depending on how good you are on the throttle. If you'd be better if you're not real smooth on the throttle, you'd actually be better off running less degrees, backing that thing back down there in that 45-degree range, because you're hooking that tire up hard when you have that more angle in there. And sometimes if your foot isn't as smooth, you can bust the traction loose, and then if it's slick and you bust traction, you just got to lift and let the traction come back to you.
Logan wrote you a book.
Yeah. Way to go, Logan. My screen's not big enough for this, so I'm going to have to take this one step at a time here. Okay. Hey, Bob, thanks for all the answering the questions about changing springs the other week. The IMCA Sport Mod's working great in the heat. It rolls good through the center of the corner and has good drive off the corner in the heat races. When it comes feature time, the racetrack is very hard and very dry. Our go-to setup is to drop the right rear trailing arm on the chassis for the feature, and we drop our Panhard bar 5 degrees. The car becomes loose on corner entry and on exit, but the car is tight in the center. We run a 3-inch offset wheel all the way around, except on the right rear when it's a 4-inch. What would you recommend to do to help the car tighten up on corner entry and exit, but free it up in the center to roll the center smoother? I'm not a fan of that 4-inch wheel. What I think happens is you move that center of that tire in so close to the center of gravity to the point where it actually rolls on that tire, and it actually loads the tire hard enough to the point where I think it probably skips traction and kind of actually slides on corner entry. and then it finally hooks up and catches up to it in the middle, well, then you got the cars tight in the middle, so then you throttle it up to help it turn, well, then you bust the tires loose to come off. I myself would rather move the rear end a quarter of an inch to the left and work with the rear end side to side a little bit. And you can't go a lot. I mean, a half an inch would be a quarter of, or I mean, would be 3 miles. A quarter of an inch is definitely 2 turns on your panhard bars, a quarter of an inch, and 2 turns on that panhard bar is definitely a good step. You got to be cautious not to over tighten that car in getting in, because if you over tighten it getting in, it'll actually feel like it's free, and the car's not, unless the car's not rolling on the right side. But if you're dropping that panhard bar, like you said, even 5 degrees is, you're doing too much. Dropping that panhard bar and changing that 4-inch offset wheel, the tire can't keep up. That right rear tire, you're loading that right rear tire so hard that it's busting it loose getting in, and that would be the case in my opinion. So I would free it up, believe it or not, on corner entry, and you'll find that the center of the corner will be better. And when the center of the corner is better, it's definitely going to be smoother off the corner, and you're going to have traction up off the corner. Dustin wants to know, what's the advantages?
That was the anti-dive question. I think you took.
Well, the more anti-dive you put in it, theoretically, you can run a softer spring and ride the brake pedal to keep the car before it drives over. The ideal deal was put more anti-dive in the right front, put a soft right front spring in there. Then if you're really good on the brakes and you're really good at trail braking, you can run the car down in the corner with the brakes so that it doesn't fall in the right front right away. Then release pressure on the brakes. It gets over on the right front, helps the car turn. The problem with that deal is, and I realize everybody's a great driver, but some guys struggle a little bit with that trail braking thing. And man, if you're really smooth with that brake pedal, there's some advantages to run some anti-dive. And that's what the anti-dive does, is it basically holds the car up on the brakes. So the advantage would be, like I said, you can run a softer spring and use trail braking to get the car into the corner, and it'll roll in the middle a little bit better than what it would otherwise. But a lot of my customers, I mean, they're pretty good trail breakers, but then when you put a camera in the car to see how good a trail breakers you are, you kind of take the camera and you go, well, we got work to do here. And so, but once we've shown people how that works, and they become better at that. But trail braking is the key. Chris, what would be a good compression and rebound shock numbers for an IMCA stock car on the left front and right rear? Well, just giving you numbers, which I'm going to give you numbers, which doesn't completely tell you the story, but it's going to give you a general idea. A stock car 4 compression shock is a pretty good number for a stock car. Rebound, you've got to be a little bit careful with rebound. We run 8s, we've run 10s. The more rebound you put in the right front, it's going to rob traction off of that stock rear suspension. So the least amount of rebound you can run and let the car still turn is definitely to your advantage. But 4.8, 4.10s in that neighborhood is pretty good. Right rear, we run a straight 4.4. In fact, that's a good question, and this is a good time for me to interrupt and talk about the shock graphs and stuff that we have to things that I had from last week that people wanted to know. Here's the thing about how to read a shock graph. On this page, you'll see a shock that's kind of a digressive shock. It's linear on compression and digressive on rebound. You notice that first section where it says low speed, that first section is that 0 to 2 inches per second. But anyway, how to read that shock graph, I should start at the very beginning. The numbers across the bottom are in inches per second of piston travel. So in other words, you'll see 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Then the next number, the number on the left, is actually force. It's measured in pounds, and it's the amount of pounds it takes to move that piston. So in other words, like say if you were to look at the 6-inch number, that particular shock, it takes 80 pounds of force at 6 inches per second on compression. Now on rebound, it's 280 pounds of force at 6 inches per second. So what that tells you is we're holding that shock down. We've got a lot more rebound in it than what we do compression, which is a very typical right front shock. Now the middle speeds, and anyway, then let me finish the axis is the top axis where the 0 and above, that is your compression valving, and the line on the x-axis that's below 0, that's your compression or your rebound valving. Then on the speeds, we've got where it says low speed, middle speed, and high speed. Low speed piston travel of your shock occurs typically 70 to 80% of the race. So we focus an awful lot on that 2 inches per second, and that's where it's hard for me sometimes to give somebody an actual number, because a lot of times we'll build something that's a whole lot stiffer at that 0 to 2 inch mark, because that's where we want to hold it down, because of course that's where it's running 80% of the time. Mid-speed range is where the shock runs about 15 to 20% of the time. And then the high-speed shock, the high-speed numbers actually only come into play about 5% to 10% of the time. So that's kind of a general shock graph and how that actually works. Here is another page where I've got 3 different graphs here. You'll notice that very top one is what we call linear valving. That's your very typical left front shock, and that's your very typical right front shock or right rear shock. And that's where, like I said, our right rear shock is like a 4-4. So it's about equal on compression and equal on rebound. Now, even a linear shock is still going to have more rebound, because the shock has to have a certain amount more rebound because of the dynamic of the spring. As the spring's compressed, it's pushing back, so we've got to kind of hold it. So we run a little bit more. They're not perfectly linear, but they're pretty much linear for the piston that we use. The next one is your typical right front, and it's what they call a linear digressive shock. It's a combination, like I said, it uses on the right front, helps the car turn through the corner. Your next one, that third picture down there, which I'm not doing, there we go. That third picture down there, that's a combination, that's a digressive linear valving. It's opposite of the right front, and its combination, that shock is what we use on our left rear. So that being said, as you can see, if you flip the left rear and the right front upside down, they would match. But the 2 linears work together and the 2 digressives work together. So it tells you kind of how we work the left rear and the right front together. And then on our top graph there, that's your pretty typical left front, pretty typical right rear shock, pretty linear. Every once in a while, we will use a shock similar to that middle graph on the left front if we're in a condition where we want to hold the left front down a little bit more, rather than say softening the spring up. we would put a little bit more rebound in that shock to kind of help the car turn getting in and work with the right front. So there's a lot of combinations that can be built in the shock. And I hope that these diagrams kind of give you the general idea of what we're talking about in the shocks. I know it's kind of confusing because there's a lot of information here, but that kind of gives you an idea. So anyway, back to Chris, you know, something like a 4.8, 4.10 right front, 4.4 right rear. On a real slick racetrack, maybe a 3.5. Sometimes on slicker racetracks, we like to hold the right rear down a little bit more and need to soften it up so it gets over there a little bit better because the racetrack slowed down. Whoops. Tim, what happens to the car when you have too much rear percentage, and what rear percentage is too high? Well, it kind of depends on the car. I'm not a real fan of anything over 56%. You maybe 56.5 if we're starting a 25 lap feature, we'll, you know, and burning methanol because we'll burn off more. If you get too high of a rear percentage, the car kind of becomes a pendulum. What will happen is that the car will go into the corner and it'll actually push just a little bit, and then all of a sudden it'll snap loose on you. So what it does is it goes in, it feels tight, 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 and then all of a sudden it's super loose. And that's kind of that pendulum effect of too much rear percentage. If we're in a drag race situation, say a racetrack that's got a really tight corner where you got to drag race off, long straightaway, you got to get off the corner, a rear percentage can be kind of an advantage because you'll use the rear percentage to free the car up getting in, and then once it's straight, you'll drag race off the corner. But if you're in anything with momentum or whatever, high rear percentage can bite you. Mike wants to know, do you weld in the lower bushings or just press them in? We actually tack weld the housing in place and then press the plastic in after that. The A-frames that we use, I don't think I would be, they aren't as tight fitting because of course our A-frames are machined so that the holes are perfectly round. What do you say, Chad?
Yeah, they definitely need to be tacked in place. One thing that, you know, our bushings are the Delrin plastic. You don't want to breathe that in. So if you're building the A-frames yourself, we do have steel, a set of steel bushings that go in there for when you're tacking them together with you should put a 1/2-inch rod through there and make sure they're lined up. But you don't ever want to weld near that plastic. A, you're going to melt it and deform it. And B, if you breathe the smoke in, you're probably going to end up flat on the floor because you'll pass out. So one thing to really be careful of there is welding or getting any plastic hot definitely is not good for you, but they do need to be welded in place.
Jake, thoughts on an ICA Northern soft left rear spring versus heavier spring, preload versus off the spring at hike, optimum level bar angle at hike. Well,
I think it's supposed to be left rear bar angle.
Oh, okay.
Level. I think it's supposed to be left.
I like the fact, I like the soft spring in one aspect that you can preload it, like you said, and it doesn't fall down as easy. The problem is you have to preload it so much with the way, if we could run a coilover, that would work perfect. But with the Northern Sport Mod, where you have to mount it on the top of the housing, I almost think there's too much room there. I still believe that there's a little bit of consistency in the heavier spring, but we've got guys that, I mean, you know, like Saturday night at Boone the other night, I know there was a total of there at one point in time there was 6 cars running together that were racing pretty hard, and half of them had a soft left rear spring in it, and half of them had a stiff left rear spring in it. So I kind of think it's a driving. I think there's a little bit more finesse needed with the softer spring, but they definitely work good. And I mean, I can't see a tremendous amount of performance on certain racetracks. Now, like if you go to a shorter racetrack like Stewart, Iowa, which is on the short side of a quarter mile, that soft spring deal where you got a drag race off the corner is killer. I mean, it's definitely an advantage on that particular racetrack. Bar angle at hike. Our left rear bar angle is 45 degrees at full dynamic load. And that's with the chain set to the point where we've got about 4.5 inches of hike on the chain. But that's normally where we're at, is 45 degrees. Now, I had one customer that he's just learning to drive. He actually never drove any race car whatsoever up until this year, and he bought a sport mod. So he's kind of struggling with certain things as far as how to get the car into the corner and how to run it. And we actually had him take angle out of his left rear, because I think what was happening for him with his lack of foot control, he would get on the throttle too hard, and all that hike would jerk the car and make the car push. Well, then he'd get out of shape, and then pretty soon he'd spin out, and he was having a heck of a time. So we took some angle out of his the other night, and that's the best he looked all year. So, and he said that the car was, he felt that it lost traction, but it was much more maneuverable for him to drive, which would make sense. I keep bending my brake floater and the bar. Why? It's a B&B floater, and I have a Wehrs cage. God, boy, I wouldn't have.
Generally, if you're bending a brake floater arm, it's because you have too much angle one way or another. The brake floaters, when you get at attitude and get all that bar angle in there, and if you get a lot of bar toe on the brake floater, you can definitely compromise on plates, because you're pushing not only in line, but then you get a side load on the plate. I don't know if you got a double shear or a single shear. Double shear is going to be stronger than the single shear, but also if you have, most of the time, if you're on a 5/8 bolt outside of your plates in single shear, you're going to be on a non-high misalignment spacer. So you might be, getting that Heim to where it's basically bound up, and then it's basically solid and it's pulling on that plate, and it's going to wreck it. Most of the time when we see a failure, it's because the Heims are bound up, too much angle. So I'd look at the bar toe when you're behind the car at ride height and see if you can straighten that bar up and make sure that it has enough motion through travel to not bind. Generally, if that stuff is in line and working properly, you're never going to bend that plate. But when you get all up at hike and get a lot of angle on things, that's generally when things take a bending.
Alex, I race a pure stock suspension mount, and can run tubular upper control arms, 3-piece spindles, stock lower control arms. The front end pushes, or what feels like it's slipping out of the turn when the track is slimy or dry slick. If I take bite out of the car, it makes the car spin the tires. I've tried moving weight to roll over and run more stagger, but it still does it. I suspect that there's my caster, because I've got 4 degrees of caster. My screen doesn't allow a very large. suspect that it is my caster because I can only get 4 degrees of caster in the right front. Do you have any suggestions or ideas besides what I'm thinking? Well, it's very possible. You know, if the car pushes in a slime, it's usually a left side percentage thing. But then you said that you put some weight on the right side and didn't seem to help. That would be my suggestion is running, you know, maybe a different offset set of wheels, or you know, if the racetrack gets real slick. But normally it's the car's not rolling on the right side and loading the right side tires is what my opinion would be. What you could do is, you know, I mean, like I said, you could change offsets. You could try a different offset to see if that helps. But I still think the adding weight equally to the point where you basically right straight across from where you're sitting on that bar that kind of holds the cage front to rear, kind of that, not the diagonal bar that goes down, but the cage bar that goes level front to rear. Put some weight on there so that when the car rolls, it rolls on the front and the rear. That would be my suggestion. What have you got any to add to that?
Nothing to add to that.
RJ, hey, can you guys manufacture a reset button like they got in iRacing? LOL. I could have used one of them 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I heard that you were involved in some of those melees at Boone that took out put some damage on quite a few race cars actually. In all seriousness, you guys are awesome, and I can't thank you both enough for your knowledge. I appreciate that. Okay, but Buddy Ray was talking about the valance support.
Yeah, I don't think IMCA is going to have a problem with them. Guys are already running straps and stuff down to it, so shouldn't be an issue. I'll double check with them, but I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I would think it would be fine. Jeff, IMCA mod having right rear Wehrs coilover with bearings on top, swift spring. I've had this happen 3 times now. The spring and the bearing pop out on the top, not staying in the spring cup.
So anytime you're going to run a Torrington bearing, that spring has to stay in tension. So if you know your right rear spring is coming loose and dangling, you can't run a Torrington bearing because it won't stay lined up and it'll pop out just like what you're saying. I don't know if you have a chain on your right rear, but you might want to look at putting a chain on the right rear and setting that with like 1.5 inch, 1.25 inch drop out, and that might keep that right rear spring in tension. Then you can run a bearing. So whether it's the left front, left rear, right rear, you know, the right front's in tension all the time, no matter where you are. But any of the other corners, if you don't have tension on that spring, you can't run the Torrington bearing because it won't stay lined up. And generally when it slams back down is when you break the washers or break the bearings. And so, yeah, definitely got to be in tension. Otherwise, you're going to have issues.
Chris, I've been having an issue with my right front frame hitting the track on entry. Do you think that I'd have a shock issue, or is there something else that could be causing that? I just got a new right front spring to put in case my current spring is collapsed. Also, how many inches of left rear droop is recommended? Thanks for all you guys do for the sport. Yeah, the spring is possibly collapsed. One thing that we've found with some of the guys that are running some of that softer compression or softer springs, you know, where you get down in that 400, 450, even some 500s, we've had to go to a stiffer compression shock absorber just to delay that, so that when it doesn't slam down, it kind of buffs it so that it doesn't slam down as far, or gets you in the corner a little further before it gets down there. That's something that we have done quite a bit recently. Is, we've got some guys that maybe say they've got a 3-valve right front shock and a 4-valve right front shock. Well, if they're doing this with the 4-valve right front shock, we just take their 3-valve and make it a 5-valve. And so now all of a sudden their right front slick shock becomes their normal base shock. And then we've got what we call a heavier shock to kind of compensate for that. That's something, but it's very possible that your spring could be collapsed when as much load as we have on these springs. And I don't really care what brand of spring it is. The load and the force that we're putting on these right front cars today, after so many nights, the spring starts to lose what it's supposed to be doing. Eric, thoughts on running a 3C, 3 compression, 7 rebound shock on the right rear of a stock car? I've actually done that in the past and had good success with it, as long as the racetrack is relatively smooth. If you get on a racetrack that's really rough, it's kind of almost like chaining the right rear down. If you get on something that's got a lot of holes or rut or choppy, it can be a little bit of a handful for the car. But if you're on a smooth, slick racetrack, it'll definitely give you traction. We've done that numerous times. We've got some guys out there that are running stuff very similar to that. Shane, Chad, building a 3-bar car with Soda Super Stock could say, I think they're similar. Sell me a pull bar and a J bar. Why choose you? Placing this order this week on many products. I think he wants you to give him a sales pitch.
Well, quality American-made products, and I don't know if there's any company that cares more about their team than mine. So the J bars that we build are inline double adjustable, and we've spent a lot of time developing the J bar that will bend and forgive the frame, so you don't rip the tube out of it and be the consumable. And then the pull bar side of it, assuming that, I don't think a Wasota Superstock can run like a spring style or a biscuit style pull bar, so you must be building an open 3-link car. And I'm not sure your weight, but possibly going with a spring bar there would be the most tunable situation. That would be, depending on the weight of the car and how much horsepower you have, I would go with a spring bar just because it's easier to tune for something that I don't know a lot about. We could definitely work with you there and develop a plan for sure.
Tom's got, what are your thoughts on right rear tracking in comparison with the front tires? Ours seems to be even on the right side. Should we move the rear end to the left? Well, kind of depends on your handling situation. I normally line my left side tires up in line, and then I try to get my right front so that it's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches outside my right rear. That seems to give the car a pretty good side bite, not too much, and it's pretty tunable in that area. If you get that right rear too far inboard, it's kind of like earlier conversation with that 4-inch wheel, going from a 3-inch wheel to a 4-inch wheel. If you get it inboard too far, the car's going to be tight for a split second and it's going to get snappy loose on you. So you got to be a little careful with that. But I always string line my cars so that the left side tires are tracked in line. Basically the opposite that you would do on a pavement car. Pavement car, those string the outside line or the outside tires in line. The dirt car, we like to see like I said, I like to see my right rear in about 1.25 inches more than the right front. What that does is it allows that right front, the front end being wider, it just allows the car to get down in, drives the front end, and the front end still has control over what the car is doing. So that's what I've had good luck with. Oops. Vic, how do you get the left front up without using a chain on the left front? Well, um, using a chain is definitely going to be the easier way. You can, depending on your sanctioning body rules, you can have a short shaft left front shock built if they don't have a specific length on the shock absorber. We do that quite often. In fact, what we actually do is we build one with a 6-inch shaft in it and then use a 1-inch spacer or 1-inch 1-inch spacer on it so that when the racetrack is, when you need it on the right rear more, you can take that spacer and put the spacer on there, and when you need more traction off the left rear, you can actually use that. That's one way to do it. Other than that, I don't know what else to tell you there, but that would be my suggestion. Taylor, what would cause a sport mod to bounce on the right rear? Newer shocks, only mid coming off the corner. Air pressure can be part of that. I have seen that happen on many racetrack or many race cars. You know, it's, once again, it could be the rear end's too far to the left, where you're getting forward traction and side traction at the same time, which kind of causes that tire to bounce itself. You know, that's about the only thing I can actually think of. That's a great question, and I need to actually look into that more because I seen some cars the other night that were having that problem at Boone Speedway, and Taylor, I'll look into that and hopefully have more answers for you here in a couple weeks. Kevin, can you explain exactly shortening and lengthening the left rear chain does on an IMCA modified? Well, lengthening the chain, well, in fact, I'll let you take that one, Chad.
Generally, my rule of thumb was always shorter early in the night when the track is heavy and got a lot of grip, and longer later on. Mainly what you're doing is you're shortening the chain, so you're increasing your left rear bite number, which is going to make the car rotate in the tack. I think that's more essential to get into the corner. Technically, it'll probably have a little more traction on exit, but you need to get in. So our rule of thumb was always shorten the tack and lengthen it out in the slick.
That's exactly what we do. What happens is your racetrack slows down. So now all of a sudden, if I've got the same amount of chain and my chain's a little short, when the racetrack slows down, when I drive down in the corner, it won't get on the right front like I wanted to because it's not letting the car transfer weight from the right left rear to the right front. So lengthening that chain out allows that car to roll on that right front a little bit better. Still gives you steer, which you need to have because your track, once again, your race car's actually slowing down because of the slick stuff. So what Chad said is exactly dead on. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't miss a question here.
Missed Kevin McFarland.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry, Kevin. What's the best 4-bar change to make going from a tacky racetrack to a slick racetrack? Is adding weight for a slick racetrack more effective on right front or right rear? Well, what's your thoughts on his bar change?
I always go to that right bottom rod for some reason. It just seems to be one of the easiest. The left rear, you really don't want to tune the left rear. You get it to the point where you got as much drive angle and as much steer as you can handle, and then just tune with the right rear is what I like to do is, right top rod and right bottom rod to tighten the car.
Yeah, I always use that right lower. For a heat race, I'll run it up one hole, so it just gets a little bit freer.
One
Racetrack
question
drive
earlier, one thing earlier, I think the one guy that gave like 4 or 5 changes there and had a lot of issues, but the one thing about the right bottom rod, if the car does fall on the right front and the right rear frame rail comes up and that bottom rod is downward, you're going to steer back. So he said something about loose end, and I forgot to bring that up, but sometimes that going down on that right bottom rod should make you rotate into the corner, so it should free it on entry and give it traction as it starts hiking. That's one thing. If the car is at attitude all the way around and you're not getting any dive or roll on that right side and the frame height isn't changing, then it ain't going to change the wheelbase. So it kind of depends on how you're riding around there and what attitude and what spring rate. If the car is getting some dive and roll motion, changing that wheelbase as you decel into the corner,
Right.
It's going to steer it loose when you dump the throttle. That was one thing I thought about when that, the right bottom rod down is going to make you free in.
Yeah, good point. That's for sure. Is adding weight for a slick racetrack more effective on the right front and on the right rear? A lot of times I do both. Small amounts. I'll put a 15-pounder up on the right front, maybe a 20-pounder on the right rear. Or if you don't have smaller weights, then once again, just like I was telling that one guy earlier, mount them up on that door bar that connects the left or the right front hoop, the right front post to the right rear post. Mount it there, or even on that diagonal bar that goes down on the cage. Because what you're trying to do is you're just trying to get it so that the car, when we've got speed, the car rolls. Well, when we take speed away from it, when it gets slick and we're kind of babying it in there, we're driving it in there nice and straight and all of that. Now all of a sudden we don't have that G-force rolling the car on the right side, so we kind of got to do something to help it. Now I don't put a lot of weight on there because sometimes I think if you get too much weight, then all of a sudden the car gets over on the right side and it lays there and it might get a little lazy coming off the corner. So I don't use a lot, but like a 15, 20 pounder on the right front and 15, 20 pounder on the right rear works really well. Taylor, what would cause a sport mod to, oh yeah, I already did that one. I didn't have an answer for her.
Should be on Tim.
Should be on Tim. Super tight on the throttle. What adjustment would you suggest on a 3-link car? Put some right rear bar angle in it. That would be one thing, because if it's super tight on throttle, that means that you got too aggressive of a left rear shock. You need to soften that up a little bit so it doesn't load it quite so fast. Maybe you've got just too much static angle, like I was talking about. My one customer that doesn't have a lot of driving experience, we took traction away from him to get it to the point where he was more comfortable with the car. So that'd be the 2 adjustments that I would do. Let's see here. Jerry, with a Sport Mod soft left rear spring with the load in it, the left rear stays up and the deck height is high. Do you put more bleed in the shock to get the deck height down? Well, that's a great question. I'm going to give you a lesson in driving. Okay. When you have a left rear shock that has a lot of gas pressure in it, do not turn that car to the left. Always make sure when you roll into tech, even if you have to make an extra circle, you turn the car to the right, so that what it does is the right comes up, squashes the left rear down. If you turn it to the left, what's going to happen is the right front's going to fall down and it's going to raise that. That's what happened to a guy 2 weeks ago at Boone Speedway. He won the feature and they docked him 2 spots because his deck height was a half an inch too high. And what he did when he came off the victory lane thing, instead of going to the right, back around the scales and into tech, he turned it to the left and rolled into the tech that way. And they wouldn't allow him to move the car after he stopped it. So they DQ'd him. Well, they didn't DQ him. They docked him 2 spots, which
Same thing
as DQing, but whatever. So always make sure when you have one of these cars today, you always turn it to the right, because that will settle that left rear shock down. Or make sure your deck height's low, and I don't do that. I keep the deck height where it's 1/4 of an inch too high and bitch about the situation. Well, not bitch about it, complain about it. Anyway, Bill, what adjustments do you suggest for a track that typically dry, slick, and smooth, and it gets rainstorms become heavy and rough?
That's a rare occurrence. Generally, if a rainstorm comes, it's over.
Yeah, that was the other thing I forgot to tell you about Boone the other night. I mean, a freaking monsoon came through there. By the time I got my golf cart to the trailer and loaded it, I might as well have been in the dunk tank because I was freaking soaked. And then on the way home, there was so much wind shear. There was times where I couldn't hardly even see the freaking road. And I'm thinking, man. So they ended up raining out their features, and they're going to have double features next week. But anyway, point being, talking about rain. It's a situation where, that's kind of going to be some shock changes possibly to adjust to that heavy and rough. And you're going to have to, if it's heavy and rough, you definitely have to have the car freer. You won't want to run the car a little too tight, because if it's a little too tight, it's going to be snappy loose. And so you're just going to have to free the car up. You raise your right lower trailing arm up, do some things like that to kind of help it. With it being a sport mod, you can definitely run that. Maybe take a little panhard bar out of it when it gets heavy. Unless you were talking about Boone the other night, but it wasn't going to be heavy and rough because it was so slick that it was. The rain went off the racetrack, but they couldn't get on the racetrack to do anything with it. And it just kept raining anyway, so it doesn't matter. A week and a day away from the Harris Clash, 31st annual Harris Clash. Those of you who are coming, make sure that you've got till midnight tonight to get the discount registration. Registration changes, the fees change. You can still register when you come if you're coming. New t-shirts, whole new design, definitely a different design t-shirt that we've not really had before, so that's exciting. Definitely want to talk about that. Right now we're kind of preliminary guessing. We're going to probably have somewhere between 100 and 120 cars between the two divisions, and so I'm excited. Once again, if you can't be there, you can watch it on IMCA TV. It's definitely going to be live streamed on IMCA TV. I'm going to take 3 more questions, and then we're out of time. Struggling on restarts on the slick. I'm dragging the brake and keeping the car up in the bars, but it struggles to dig off the corner. Where's cage with brake floater bolted to the cage? It sounds like a pull bar issue to me.
Yeah, it might be. It's more of an instant traction situation with your pull bar, I believe. More angle probably, or fuzz to the left, or just maybe a little bit of a preload adjustment probably. I don't know what you got for a pull bar, but I would say you probably need a pull bar adjustment.
That's what I would suggest. Aaron, what's the best tire? I don't know nothing about tire dopes. I realize you're asking for a friend, and I appreciate that. Tell your friend that you're really sorry your old buddy Bob doesn't know anything about that tire doping stuff. All I know is if you don't do it right, you may have a mess. So I've never actually done it, to be honest. Go-kart tires we did, but the IMCA tire, yeah. The way that tire's made, that's risky. I know there's some guys that like win 6 features in a row or whatever. You might want to just check with them. They might have a better idea on what to do. I mean, things like that. I mean, I know some guys out there that are pretty fast, and some nights they're super fast and some nights they're not. So you might want to, ask them. Maybe they can help you. Do you drop the J-bar below the pinion when the racetrack gets slick off? GRT 19. Kevin, I don't. Some guys do. I wouldn't go more than a half an inch below the pinion, because what's going to happen is you're going to get so low that it's going to create a situation where you're trying to load the tire, but you're in a sense kind of binding the car up in a little bit to the point where it's just got too much angle in that Panhard bar, and I think it can actually cause. It's easy when a racetrack's super dry slick. It's easy to break tires loose to begin with, and that could do something that would do that. Kevin, thanks again for the nice comments. Larry, thanks again for the nice comments. Yeah, Shane, no limit cards. Yep. We when my son we ran junior 1 go-karts and did very well in the junior 1s, moved up to junior 2s. I spent a ton of money on tires and a ton of money on tire dope and all this magical stuff to do all this stuff. Needless to say, we ran 1 year in the junior 2s, and I told the boy it was time for him to start football. So he retired at an early age because I decided I could have an IMCA modified, and I could run that modified cheaper than I could run that dang go-kart that paid nothing. So needless to say. All right, guys. Well, thanks for all you guys chiming in here tonight. Great questions. Another great group tonight. I appreciate everybody logging on. And once again, don't forget about the Harris Clash coming up August 2nd, Deer Creek Speedway, also on IMCA TV. Thanks again, guys.
Awesome night. Thank you.
Night.